The Palestinians need to wake up and kick their leaders out. And it needs to come from them. The world cannot do it for them. They need to wake up and stop buying the lies. They need to realize they are being used as puppets in the hands of a corrupt leadership. And they need to kick that leadership out and start negotiating with the Israelis. Today, under the Palestinian Authority in the Palestinian schools, when you see maps of Palestine, Israel doesn't exist. It shows the whole area as the map of Palestine. They want the whole land. They do not want Israel to exist in the Middle East. Israel has no place in the Middle East. They do not want any Jews living in Arabic territories. You look at Israel. Israel has Muslim Israeli citizens. They have Muslim in parliament in the Knesset. Show me one Arabic country in the world that has a Jew in its government. I was born and raised in South Lebanon in a little town called Marjayoun on the border with Israel. My parents were married for 22 years. They were not able to have any children, and my mother was 55 years old and my father was 60 when I was born. I was fortunate to live with two parents that loved me and dedicated their life to me. They were retired by that time because they had me in later years. My father was running a restaurant. He owned a restaurant and a lot of real estate. So I was raised in a place where I got to meet a lot of members in the community who came there to eat or to visit with my parents and have a cup of coffee. And I was able to hear adult conversation talking about politics, talking about religion, talking about the situation in the Middle East. And as usual, we always had a war going on or a conflict going on. Even though I was raised in a Christian country, we were very much still influenced by Arabic opinion. We were very much influenced by the Arabic countries surrounding us. And we spoke Arabic, we practiced the Arabic culture. So we thought like the Arabs thought. We thought Israel was bad. I was taught growing up as a child that Israel, Azrael, the Jews are demons. They are barbaric. They are the source of the problems in the Middle East. And the only time we will have peace in the Middle East is when we kill all the Jews and drive them into the sea. That's what I heard on television. That's what I heard on the radio. That's what I saw people talk about when they would come to my father's restaurant and they would be sitting around the tables talking. That was the opinion of the Lebanese people at the time. We listened to the media that was governed by our government, so we only heard what our government wanted us to hear. As usual in the Middle East, it's always a one-sided story. You never hear the other side because all the media in all the Arabic countries are manipulated by the government. I went to a Christian private school, and even in my private school, in my Bible class, we never studied the Old Testament. Our Bibles did not include the Old Testament because the Old Testament was considered the enemy's book. It was the Torah, and the Bible had nothing to do with it.
Tell me a little bit about the population of Lebanon. Who's who and who was what back then?
When we got our independence from France in the 90s, the majority of the population in Lebanon were Christians. The Muslims were the minority. As the years passed by, that population shifted because we do not have as many children as the Muslims do. The Christians got married to one spouse until death do us part. We have maybe 3, 4 children, while the Muslims are allowed to marry up to 4 wives at a time according to their religion. So they would marry multiple wives and they would have a lot of children. The most famous Muslim in the world today is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is 1 out of 53 children. He himself has 27 children. Between father, son, they have produced 80 children. How many Christian families do you know that have 80 children? It's just impossible. We don't do that. And that's what shifted the population in Lebanon. The Muslims multiplied at a much faster pace than we did. And after 20, 30 years of that, they became the majority. We became the minority. Even though we held the positions of professionals, we were more educated simply because we did not have as many children. So we were able to send our kids to college. Education was very, very important to us. The Muslims, on the other hand, simply by the sheer fact as having many children, they were not able to educate their children as much as we were able to educate ours. And it was just a completely different culture within a culture. It was a very different 2 segments of society.
What was another factor that affected the balance between the Christians and the Muslims?
Another factor that affected the balance was the influx of the Palestinians out of Jordan and into Lebanon in 1970. Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians tried to throw King Hussein out of power. Yasser Arafat wanted to create a base in which to fight Israel. When he failed to do that in Jordan and King Hussein kicked them out into Lebanon, we took them in. We already had Palestinian refugee camps set up. So the majority of the Palestinians that came from Jordan into Lebanon were Muslims. We already had a problem in the balance already in Lebanon between the Christians and the Muslims, but with the influx of the Palestinians into Lebanon, them being Muslims, it aggravated the problem. And Yasser Arafat tried to do in Lebanon exactly what he tried to do in Jordan, create another base in which to fight Israel. And he succeeded. And in order to do that, he had to control the population. So he put his head together with the Muslims in Lebanon, and together they declared jihad on the Christians, and that's how the civil war started.
When did things take a turn for the worse for you and your family?
Things started changing for us, as far as I remember, around 1974. Every year we used to go spend the holidays in Beirut with the rest of my family because it was only my mom and my dad lived in Marjayoun. And we stopped going. And I would ask my father, how come we're not spending Christmas in Beirut with the rest of the family? And he would give me some lame excuse like, well, we decided to stay home this Christmas. And I could not understand as a child. Later, I found out that the reason why we were staying home is because the Muslims and the Palestinians started setting up checkpoints. They created a combined army called Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, which was the Arabic-Lebanese army. And it was the combination of the Palestinians and the Lebanese Muslims. And they would set up checkpoints in the middle of the night, in the middle of the roads. And if they see a Christian, they would stop cars. And they would get people out of the car and they would look at their ID. And if the ID said that this family is a Christian, because in Lebanon, we were identified on our IDs. Our religion was either Christian, Muslim, or Jewish. And we didn't have many Jews by that time. But when they would find out that this was a Christian family, they would get them out of the car and kill them, shoot the whole family. The word spread very fast and Christians became prisoners to their own towns and their own communities. We were afraid to travel. But the major thing that changed my life was the bombing of my home. When the Lebanese Arabic army was trying to take over the military bases in Lebanon, they had taken over all the military bases with the exception of the military base above my home. They bombed that military base in an attempt to take it over. They missed the military base and all their rockets exploded in my home, bringing it down and burying me under the rubble. I was wounded and I ended up spending 2.5 months in the hospital. And I remember as a child asking my parents, why did they do this to us? And my father would always say, because we are Christians. They're trying to kill us. And I knew ever since I was a child that I am wanted dead simply because I was a Christian who happened to live in a Christian town. When I came back home, home was no longer the home that I left because my home was half destroyed. My new home became a bomb shelter underground with no electricity, no water, and very little food. My mother and I used to have to go out and hunt for grass and dig dandelions and any green vegetation that grew around our bomb shelter to eat. My mother would soak chickpeas overnight and rice and beans so we can eat that the next day. To get some water, we would crawl to a nearby spring to fetch some water, and we would crawl under snipers' bullets. And when we would get to the spring, we would be hiding behind the wall, and my mother would hold the gallon to fill it with water, and she would put a stocking on top of it to catch all the worms and all the maggots and all the rocks so we can drink the water. And then we would crawl back to the bomb shelter. Sometimes it would take us hours because of the sniper who was terrorizing us. And that went in and day out, year in and year out. Our life became unbearable. We had no electricity, so we had no heat. We were living underground in a cold, damped bomb shelter. During the day, we would let little rays of lights that we'd sneak in through the door and through the holes in the little window that we had. And at night, we would light kerosene candles, kerosene lamps, so we would have some light. And we would freeze. It was so cold. We would freeze. My father in the wintertime would break twigs and we would make a fire inside the shelter. And we would fall asleep. And most mornings we would wake up with carbon monoxide poisoning. And whoever woke up first would drag the other two outside and slap them so we could wake up. And that's the type of life I lived. I lived in the bomb shelter from age 10 to age 17, robbed from my youth.
Well, what sort of tactics did the Palestinians use during the war?
When the Palestinians started fighting in Lebanon, the war took on such savagery that it was inconceivable for us to think of. So they started massacring the Christian cities, city after city. One of the major massacres was the city of Damour. They would walk into a bomb shelter and they would see a mother and a father hiding in the bomb shelter with a little baby. They would tie one leg of the baby to the mother, another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. They would walk into the churches and they would urinate and defecate on the altar using the Bible pages as toilet paper. The last friend that I had before I left Lebanon, who worked for me, she was mentally disturbed because they made her slaughter her own son on her lap. They tied her to a chair, tied a knife to her hand, held her hand, and made her cut her own son's throat. They would kill the Christian men, and one of the Palestinian signature killing way was to cut the genitals of the male and stick it in his mouth and cut a cross with a knife on his chest. That's how they used to kill the Christian men and leave them laying on the grounds in the moor. In my town, in the beginning of the war, when they were starting to take control a little bit, we would be hiding in the bomb shelter. And in the beginning of the war, the renters that rented from us, we all hid together in this small room, an 8 by 10 room. That's where 4 families lived. They had 9 children. We were 9 children in the bomb shelter. I was the oldest child. The Palestinians would park their cannon in front of our bomb shelter and shoot at Israel, fully knowing that Israel is going to retaliate and we're going to die, because the way they would do it is they would shell Israel, then drive their tank away. So when Israel would shell back, we would, be dead, and we would make great evening news, great ratings. And that was a tactic that the Palestinians used over and over. They would hide between civilians. They would shoot their tanks and their cannons in between the civilians' home. And they always chose the Christians' homes only, not the Muslims' homes, because they wanted us to die, not the Muslims. And that's how the war continued. It was unbelievable for us as Christians to even fathom the barbarism and the monstrosities that they have committed, because we have no point of reference to such savagery.
Well, what was life like for you and your family in that bomb shelter?
Well, our back was to Israel, and the Palestinians were surrounding us to kill us. So we either were going to be killed and slaughtered by the Palestinians, or we go to Israel and beg for help. And we knew of the two evils, because remember, we were raised in Lebanon thinking that Israel is the devil, the Jews are evil. But we knew of the two evils. The Jews are not going to slaughter us, because after all, we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims and the Palestinians. So a few people from my town went to Israel and begged for help. And that's how we stayed alive. Israel would come in the middle of the night and would bring supplies to the Christians. They would bring food, milk for the children. They would bring ammunition to the military. They would take the Christian men and train them inside Israel, because the Christians were educated, but they didn't know how to street fight. We were not like the Palestinians. And you can have all the degrees on the wall, law degree, a doctorate. That does not defend your life from someone who is bent on killing you in the name of God. Israel was the only country that understood what the Christians were going through. And Israel stood by us and kept us alive. And that's how we stayed alive for 7 years. In 1982, Israel entered Lebanon. And notice how I say entered Lebanon, not invaded Lebanon. The Christians were praying for Israel to come into Lebanon and liberate them from the Palestinians. And the only reason Israel came into Lebanon was because Hezbollah was working with the Palestinians, also with the Syrians, and we had a lot of other Muslims from a lot of Arabic countries that came to Lebanon to fight Israel. And they started shelling Israel. And all the northern towns in Israel were being shelled to the point where their citizens were living in bomb shelters just like us. And this went on for months. It wasn't a matter of a month or two. This went on for months. And Israel decided it's going to go into Lebanon and at least clear the Palestinians and push them far enough so that their artillery would not reach the northern towns of Israel. While Israel entered Lebanon, Muslims and the Palestinians were shelling us frantically. One of their bombs exploded in front of my bomb shelter as my mother was running to the shelter, and she became wounded. When she became wounded, we had nowhere to take her in Lebanon. Our only lifeline was Israel. That's where all the sick went to get treated. That's where all the wounded went to get treated. Medical treatment free of charge to anyone that needed it. For 7 years, when Israel took care of us. We took my mother to get first aid at the Lebanese hospital in my town, which was a shell of a hospital. There was one Israeli doctor and 2 Israeli nurses on duty. They gave her first aid, and we put her in an Israeli-donated ambulance and drove her to the border. It was a 10-minute drive. The Lebanese driver, when we got to the border, walks over and asks me for money for the fee for the ambulance. And like an innocent teenager, I pull all the money that my daddy had given me out of my pocket, and I show it to him, and I say, "How much do I owe you?" And he looks at my money, and he says, "Give me 30, which was half the money I had. I gave it to him, and I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. He said that was the fee for the ambulance. They transferred my mother into another Israeli ambulance inside Israel, and that ambulance drove us to Sivat Hospital, which was an hour drive. The driver was an Israeli soldier. He was so nice to me. He treated me like his own daughter. He put me at such ease because I was afraid. I was afraid of the unknown. I was uncomfortable. I felt awkward. After all, I'm a Lebanese. I didn't have anyone in Israel. My mother was half unconscious in the back stretcher of the ambulance. And I was stunned at how nice that Israeli driver was. We get to the hospital. They took my mother out into the emergency room. I walked around to the Israeli driver to pay him my money, the fee for the ambulance. He looked at it and he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Don't you need the fee for the ambulance?" And he says, "No." He said, "This is a free service from us to you. Keep your money, and I wish you well. I hope your mothers recover." And I thought to myself, what an honest man. What an ethical man. This man could have taken my money and partied all night, and I would not have known the difference. Yet he didn't. And all of a sudden, I felt very angry because I realized that the Lebanese driver who drove me the 10-minute drive to the border basically robbed me. That was my first lesson in the character and values of the Arabic people and the Israeli people. We went into the emergency room, and there were hundreds of people wounded in the emergency room. There were Lebanese brought in from Lebanon. There were Christians brought in from Lebanon, Muslims brought in, Palestinians wounded brought in from Lebanon. And I could not believe my eyes. And I thought to myself, I can understand why they're treating me. After all, I am their friend. I'm a Christian. I am their ally. But why on earth are they treating the Palestinians and the Muslims? These are the enemy. These are the people who were bombing us. Little did I know about the values of the Israeli people. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They treated people like human beings in need. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her because her injury was more severe. I thought to myself, this is unbelievable, but maybe that's the exception. They took my mother to the 4th floor of the hospital, and we were in the room maybe 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window. And I went out to see what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, bringing in Israeli soldiers wounded in Lebanon in the war. And I stood at that balcony, looking at that scene, looking down at the ground. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt out of place. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I didn't look at anyone around me. There were a lot of people. There were mothers of wounded soldiers, fathers who were in the hospital with their children, nurses. I didn't make any contact with anybody around me. And I kept looking at the floor. And then I felt this tapping on my shoulder. And I looked, and there was this Israeli nurse looking at me, and she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, they just brought in my mother. She's in this room." And she could see the fear in my eye, and she just put her arm around me and said, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. Everything will be fine." And the first time in my life, I experienced civilization. I broke out crying. I broke out sobbing. because I experienced the compassion and love that I knew, and humanity that I knew that my society would not be able to show their enemy. I knew for a fact that if I was a Jew standing on the fourth floor of a Lebanese hospital, I will be lynched and thrown down to the ground as shouts of joy of Allahu Akbar will echo through the hallways of the hospital and down the surrounding streets. When the Israelis found out that there were Lebanese wounded in Israeli hospitals, they came in bringing presents. They came in extending a peaceful hand. They came in bringing chocolates. They would visit the wounded families and they would say, "What can we do for you? What can we bring you? Our homes are your home. If you need to stretch, if you need to sleep, if you missed bringing something from home, please let us bring it to you." It was unbelievable. I became friends with the families, with the mothers and the sisters of the wounded soldiers in the hospital. One in particular, Rena Potashnik, I'll never forget her name. Her only son, Amir, who was 19 years old, was wounded in the hospital in his eye, and he lost sight of that eye. And she became like my surrogate mother. I spent a lot of time with her because I was with my mom in the hospital for 22 days. And I would go visit Rena, and one day in particular, the Israeli army band came to play songs to lift the Israeli soldiers' souls. They came to play national songs, and I was visiting with her in her room, and they came to play the song, and they stood around Amir's bed. And I felt so out of place. I started walking out of the room, and she started crying, listening to the music. And when she sensed that I was walking backwards, so she wouldn't notice me even leaving the room, she pulls me by my hand, brings me back inside, and she hugs me, and she says, "It's not your fault." And we both stood there crying. And I thought to myself, what a contrast between her, a mother looking at her only child, only deformed child, and still able to love me, the Arab. What a contrast between her and a suicide bomber's mother who sends her only son and daughter to strap bombs around themselves and blow themselves up to smithereens just to kill a Jew. Or a few Jewish children. I spent 22 days at the hospital. Those days changed my life. Those days changed the way I believe information. I watched television. I listened to the radio, because I realized I was fed a fabricated lie about the Jews and about Israel that was so far from reality. I realized that it was my culture that taught hate. It was my culture that was unable to love and show compassion to their enemy in their time of need, the way the Israelis were able to show compassion to the Palestinians, to the Muslims, to the Lebanese at their time of need. And I realized the difference in values and character between the Arabic society and the Israeli society. And that's basically where the problem stems from. It's the difference in values.
Well, then what happened after your mother finished her treatment in the hospital?
When my mother finished her treatment in the hospital, we had to go back to Lebanon. I was delighted to be back because I missed my father so much. We had been gone for a while. But it was a double-edged sword because I did not want to go back to Lebanon. And the minute we crossed the border, I felt I am crossing back into the gates of hell. And I didn't want to cross. And I remember grabbing onto the barbed wire to the point where it cut the palm of my hand. I was bleeding, telling my mother, crying, "Please don't take me out of here. I do not want to go back into Lebanon." And she looked at my face and she said, "And who's going to take care of me and your dad?" I was an only child. And I didn't know what to tell her. I had to go back to Lebanon. And I felt I was being sentenced back to hell. I went into depression. I was very depressed. I didn't want to leave the house. I stayed home. All I thought about was my days in the hospital because I left my heart in Israel. I left my heart with people who taught me humanity, who taught me respect for humanity, respect for human life. I was able to see a side to the Israelis that I know for a fact did not exist where I come from. They had respect for humanity that I didn't know of until I went to Israel. They had compassion. They had values. They had principles that were foreign in my culture. I was so depressed, and I vowed that one day I will be back to Israel because those are the type of people I want to be like. These are the type of characters I want to adopt. And I ended up going back to Israel 3 years later to work in Jerusalem.
Well, then how did you get back to Israel?
I got a job working as news anchor for World News Tonight in Jerusalem. And it was a dream come true. I never, beyond my wildest dream, ever thought that I will be able to go work in Israel in such a profession that gave me the ability to meet world leaders and be exposed to information and be able to judge information that was not filtered through the Arabic filters and through the Arabic propaganda. I was able to make decisions and learn about situations in the world where I can evaluate and form an opinion, my own opinion, based on factual information without the exaggeration and the propaganda of the Arabs. It also gave me an insight into the Palestinian culture and into the Israeli culture, because Jerusalem is the pinnacle of East meets West. In Jerusalem, you have the western side of the city where the Jewish people live, and you have the eastern side of the city where the Arabs live. And the contrast is blinding. It really shows you the difference in the culture and in the values of the two people. It also taught me about the exaggeration of the media, the Arabic media, and what truly was happening in the territories. We had friends in Bethlehem, and we would go visit our friends in Bethlehem, and our friends were Christians. And it got to the point where the Christians were afraid for their lives because they were so intimidated by the Muslims, by the Palestinian Muslims. The Palestinian Muslims would go into Christian cemeteries. They would break the crosses. They would dig the bodies. And when we would do interviews with these Christians, we had to disguise their face because their life was threatened just because they were telling the truth. Because if their Muslim neighbors ever found out that they're speaking about what they're being subjected to, they would be killed. The intimidation and the death threats were unbelievable. In the old city of Jerusalem, when I was working as a news anchor, in the Christian quarter, a few Christian girls were walking back from Catholic school, dressed in the Catholic uniform. And there were a few incidences where Muslim Palestinian students would throw acid on the Christian girls' faces. A couple girls were deformed because of acids and had to be taken into Israeli hospitals. I was able to see the Israeli side that always believes the best, hopes for peace, teach their children that one day we're going to have peace with the Palestinians. One day we're going to have peace with our Arab neighbors, and we're going to do everything we can to achieve that peace. Yet you would go visit the Palestinians, and the Palestinians teach their children, one day we're going to kill all the Jews and drive them into the sea. I saw nothing but two faces. One, a face of hate and evil, and one, a face of love and compassion. And that's what the situation is between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Well, what sort of danger did you face from Islamic terror organizations while you were in Israel?
I was very worried for my life because in the Middle East, when you speak the truth, when you report honestly about the facts and what's going on, your life gets threatened, because if the Palestinian media cannot control what you're saying, if the Arabic government cannot control what you're saying, you are a major threat to them because you are informing the population of what is truly happening. And that's what I did when I worked for Middle East television. They tried to assassinate me in Lebanon. They tried to shoot at me one day when I was walking home. They thought I was dead. I played dead in a ditch until they left, and then I crawled home. They chased me in twice. I was chased for 2 hours. One time between Tel Aviv and Haifa. I traveled wearing different wigs so people would not recognize who I am. I would always disguise my appearance. People in America do not realize that here in this country, we can voice our opinion. We can even cuss the president on national television. And we never, ever have to fear for our lives because we have freedom of press, freedom of speech. In the Middle East, there is no such thing. There is no freedom of press. If you go against the tide, if you go against what you're told to say, you are a threat and you will be killed. There have been many incidences of journalists in the Middle East being shot, being killed, losing their jobs, and especially now it's a well-known tactic on the Palestinian territories. You report what comes out of Yasser Arafat. You do not go against the Palestinian media or you will be killed. And the tactics they're using right now is they're accusing reporters of being traitors, being informant to the Israeli army, and they're killing them publicly because that's the accusation that they're sticking on them instead of them saying, well, he's not listening to what we want him to report, and therefore that's why we killed him. Hezbollah published my picture in the Hezbollah magazine in Lebanon, along with the Israelis news anchor for Mabat, the evening news, calling me a traitor asking that I should be killed, calling me an Israeli informant, an Israeli spy. It was very dangerous for me to even travel within the security zone inside Lebanon.
Well, I understand you buried both of your parents in Jerusalem. What was your motivation for doing something like that?
Before I left Israel and came to the States, I wanted to make sure both my parents were buried in Israel. My father was living with me at the time when he died, and I buried him in Jerusalem on Mount Zion. But my mother had died a year and a half earlier. So before I came to the States, I went back to her grave, dug her out of her grave, took her out of her casket, put her in another casket in my car, and drove her to Israel and buried her with my father, because I wanted to ensure that my children, yet unborn, will always know where my loyalty lies and will always be drawn to Israel. I believe actions speak louder than words. People can say anything. It's their actions that tell you exactly where they stand. And that's why I buried my parents on Mount Zion. If you are ever in Jerusalem and you are visiting the Oskar Schindler Cemetery, you would be passing by my parents' grave on your way to his tomb.
Do you think if the Israelis gave back the West Bank and Gaza, there would be peace?
No, it's not Gaza and the West Bank. Israel could give them Gaza and the West Bank, but the Palestinians want it all, not only Gaza and the West Bank. People need to realize when the PLO was formed in 1964, Gaza was illegally invaded and occupied by Egypt, and the West Bank was illegally invaded and occupied by Jordan. When the PLO was formed in 1964, it wasn't Gaza and the West Bank that Yasser Arafat was fighting to get. It was Israel proper that Yasser Arafat wanted. Today, under the Palestinian Authority in the Palestinian schools, when you see maps of Palestine, Israel doesn't exist. It shows the whole area as the map of Palestine. They want the whole land. They do not want Israel to exist in the Middle East. Israel has no place in the Middle East. They do not want any Jews living in Arabic territories. You look at Israel. Israel has Muslim Israeli citizens. They have Muslim in parliament in the Knesset. Show me one Arabic country in the world that has a Jew in its government. The Arabs hate the Jews, and they do not want the Jews in the Middle East. The Jews don't have a place in the Middle East. And no, Israel can give Gaza and can give back the West Bank to the Palestinians. It's not going to be enough, and it's not going to be peace, and they're going to be fighting to get more and more and more.
Well, what do you think about the Palestinian leadership?
I think the Palestinian leadership is corrupt. The Palestinian leadership is the cancer that is killing the Palestinians. If the Palestinian leaders cared about the Palestinian people, the least they can do is take those millions and millions of dollars that have poured into the Palestinian territories ever since the Palestinian Authority came into power in 1995. Millions of dollars have poured from the United States, from the European Union into the Palestinian territories and went into the pockets of Yasser Arafat and his cronies, while the Palestinians are still living in refugee camps. Refugee camps under their own leadership. There's no other group in the world, no other group of people in the world live under their own leadership in refugee camps like rats, without dignity. They live on top of each other. The least the Palestinian leaders, if they care about their people, would take some of the money that's been allocated to improve the Palestinian territories and at least build townhomes for them. Let them live in dignity. Let them go to the bathroom in decent bathrooms. Let them live with respect. But instead, Palestinian leadership pockets the money. It goes for bribery, for driving the Mercedes, for driving the BMW, for fancy vacations, for fancy homes. Abu Mazen has a $1.5 million home in Gaza. How many Palestinians that live in Gaza live in a $1.5 million home? The Palestinians need to wake up and kick their leaders out. And it needs to come from them. The world cannot do it for them. They need to wake up and stop buying the lies. They need to realize they are being used as puppets in the hands of a corrupt leadership. And they need to kick that leadership out and start negotiating with the Israelis. Because if they would have accepted the Israelis' plan in 2000, when Barak offered them a plan that was irrefusable, if they would have accepted that plan, they would have had 97% of the territories right now. Gaza would be 100% under Palestinian leadership. And they even turned that down. Yasser Arafat does not want peace with the Israelis. And it's time the Palestinians kick him out, choose a new leader. And it's the duty of all Palestinians. I urge all Palestinians worldwide. There are Palestinians who are educated, that live in England, that live in Australia. It needs to come as a worldwide movement to kick the leadership out from the Palestinian territories and start negotiating with Israel if they want peace.
How would you describe how the Palestinians are using the Europeans and the West to further their own goals?
The Palestinians learned to manipulate the media. They know how to play the West like a violin. We in the United States, because we have no point of reference to positioning, for example, leaders, military leaders, and cannons amongst civilians in a war state. When the Israelis, for example, are going after Hamas leaders, those Hamas leaders are changing position every night and every other night, and they are hiding among Palestinian civilians. They are basically killing their own people. But when you watch the news at night and you realize that when Israel kills a Hamas leader, other 14 people are dead, some of them are children, the West thinks, oh my gosh, Israel is doing a horrible thing here, they're killing the children. They need to realize that these leaders are hiding amongst these children. That's what's killing their own people. The West does not understand how the Middle East think, which is shocking to me when they go invest so much time and energy understanding, for example, how to do business with the Japanese. They learn Japanese culture. They learn this is the effective way to deal with Japan, and you learn these customs. And here we are in a state of war. We are fighting a holy war that's been declared on Jews and Christians worldwide. Yet in this country, we are burying our head in the sand in the United States. And you have organizations such as Duke universities, which is supposed to be an intellectual place where people come to learn and be tolerant about each other and learn about different cultures and different ideas. Yet a university like Duke would allow a hate fest, basically, where people can stand up there and spew hate towards the Jews and say, oh, the Jews need to be killed. We feel sorry for the Jews. How can we allow such talk if I, as an American citizen, get on television or organize a rally at a university campus and say, all gays need to be killed because all gays are terrible and we need to annihilate them? Would I survive a day? I'll be thrown in prison. I will be sued. How come we have such double standards towards issues? How come we allow the Palestinians to say, we do not want to condemn violence because it's irrelevant. It's not going to do anything. How can we accept that? You're looking at hundreds of Muhammad Attas in the making who believe in suicide bombing, who believe in terrorism, who basically in a way are supporting terrorism indirectly. Because when you refuse to condemn the suicide bombers and terrorism and violence, your hands are soiled with the blood of the innocents just as much as any suicide bomber who blows himself up. The innocents' blood is on your hand. And this is what people need to realize. These conventions are nothing but a hate fest towards the Jews. Simple. And not only the Jews, also towards America. And we need to wake up.
As an American, why do you think the Middle East is an important matter for all Americans?
The Middle East should be the utmost important matter to all Americans at this point, especially after 9/11. For the last 20 years, Americans have not paid attention to what's been going on around the world. The terrorist attacks around the world, all the terrorist organizations that we're dealing with today, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. Where do you think Islamic Jihad came from? Where do you think Hamas came from? To focus only on Al-Qaeda is a fatal error. Al-Qaeda is a transnational organization made up of a merging of different groups together under Al-Qaeda. We have proof that Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah have established linkages with Al-Qaeda in the United States. And of all terrorist organizations in the United States, Hamas has the largest American infrastructure. Hamas is not an Israeli problem. Hamas is a United States problem. Hamas is a world problem. What people in American society need to understand that Hamas and its leaders, the leader that Israel killed, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, is the guy who wrote the Hamas Charter. If Americans would read the Hamas Charter, Article 22 of the Hamas Charter mentions the Lions Club as a terrorist organization to be destroyed, as secret organizations to be destroyed. The Lions Clubs, the Rotary Clubs, the Freemasons, the Bnei Brits, and the likes, such as the Kiwanis. How many Lion Club members in the United States know they are mentioned in the Hamas Charter? If Americans think Hamas is over there, it's Israel's problem, that's all in the Middle East, let's leave them all behind and focus on the United States, they are mistaken. Hamas has chapters in 40 states in the United States. And that's what America needs to wake up and start learning about.
Since you've become active speaking out about Israel, what do you think about Jewish opinions towards the Palestinian situation?
This is a great question. It saddens me to see the difference between the Jews and the way they handle the Palestinian situation and the Palestinians and how they handle speeches about the Israelis and the Jews. When I was asked to speak at Duke, I was instructed by Hillel, which is the organization that sponsored my speaking, to respect the Palestinians. Don't say bad things about the Palestinians. Don't say anything derogatory about the Palestinians nor the Muslims, nor their hate teachings. Don't point the finger at anyone. Just speak about terrorism in general, because we want to create awareness. They actually even have a concert to keep the mood light. And you contrast that with the Palestinians on campus, who are basically on the other side of the campus, spewing hate. The hatred that comes across in their speeches is absolutely unacceptable. And the sad reality is that this is the same type of signs that we started seeing before World War II. It's the sign of hate verbiage that Hitler used to say about the Jews before World War II, before he started killing them. And the Jews did not believe it back then. And they always hoped for the best. And now, as a third party, look at the two of them from a distance, and I see the same thing is happening again. The Palestinian Solidarity Movement at Duke, at the convention, refused to condemn violence, refused to condemn suicide bombers.
Thank you very much for being with us. You've shed a lot of light on something that a lot of people do need to be informed about, and I'm sure they have been during this interview today. We look forward to having you back on the web sometime. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide, or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.